Picture an office party. You know the kind.
Oh, yeah. The classic awkward corporate mixer.
Exactly. You are standing there hovering near the punch bowl, just trying to survive the baseline social awkwardness of the wild.
Right.
And over comes Clive from accounting.
Good old Clive.
He eyes the tray of deviled eggs, looks at you, and says, "Beautiful weather today, huh? Supposed to rain tomorrow."
Classic.
And you nod. He takes an egg, grabs a paper napkin, and just walks away. Conversation over. Social contract completely fulfilled.
It is, I mean, it's the ultimate social lubricant, right? People use it to fill the silence, primarily because it's universally experienced, but completely non-threatening.
Yeah, you're establishing a shared reality without risking any actual vulnerability.
Exactly. You both occupy the same physical atmosphere, so, you have common ground.
But if you, the listener, really want to stop a conversation dead in its tracks at your next office party.
Well, please do this.
Right. Don't ask Clive how the weather is. Stop, furrow your brow, look him dead in the eye, and ask him what the weather is.
He will likely stare at you like you've completely lost your mind.
Oh, totally. Or he'll just slowly back away from the punch bowl.
Because while we all experience it constantly, defining what it fundamentally is turns out to be an incredibly slippery philosophical problem.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to this deep dive. Our mission today is to take this ultimate, mundane, small talk topic for you and just radically deconstruct it.
That's going to be a fun one.
We are going to explore how weather is not just a passive backdrop to your morning commute. It's a dynamic, civilization-shaping force.
Yeah, it really defines human history, our technologies, our language.
Our very understanding of luck, risk, and time. By the end of this conversation, you will never look at a rain cloud or, open a forecasting app the exact same way again.
And my role here is to sort of synthesize the philosophy, the history, and the meteorology behind all this.
Perfect.
Because when you strip away the familiar, like the gentle spring showers or the snowy mornings, you realize that weather is one of the hidden gears of human civilization.
It drives almost everything we do.
Exactly. From how we build our cities to how we literally conceptualize the future.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can figure out how weather shapes society, we need to answer that awkward punch bowl question. What exactly is weather?
Right.
Because my default instinct is just to give you a list. Rain, snow, sleet, hail, maybe a gust of wind. It's just stuff falling from the sky.
Which is how the human brain naturally categorizes the world, right? By pointing to the most common localized examples.
Yeah, what's in my backyard?
But if you rely on a list, you hit a wall very quickly. Because atmospheric phenomena on this planet extend so far beyond our mundane experience.
Oh, absolutely.
If we define weather just by what happens outside our window, we miss the truly terrifying exotic mechanics of the Earth.
And the exotic examples are just wild. Like, forget a gentle drizzle. Consider a yokelaup.
Oh, bless you for pronouncing that.
I tried. It's an Icelandic term for a massive glacial outburst flood. It happens when a subglacial volcano erupts under a massive ice cap. The heat melts millions of tons of ice, but the water is trapped under the glacier until the pressure builds to this catastrophic breaking point.
Just unimaginable pressure.
Yeah. And suddenly, a literal wall of water, ice boulders, and volcanic ash obliterates everything downstream. It's a flood, but it's generated by fire and ice interacting.
Or look at haboobs, which occur in arid regions.
Great word, haboob.
It is. People often just call them dust storms, but the fluid dynamics are fascinating. A thunderstorm builds up, but the rain evaporates before it hits the ground.
Wait, really? The rain doesn't even land?
Right. It's a phenomenon called virga. And the evaporation cools the air rapidly. That dense, cold air plummets to the surface and bursts outward, acting like a giant bulldozer blade.
Ah.
It scoops up thousands of tons of sand and dust, creating this suffocating mile-high wall of debris that can swallow entire cities in minutes.
That is terrifying. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. We also have biological weather. Have you ever heard of hair ice?
Hair ice? No, that sounds like a sci-fi concept.
Right. So you're walking through a freezing forest, and you see what looks like a white woolly beard growing out of a dead log.
Okay.
It isn't frost. It's caused by a specific winter fungus. The fungus produces a chemical that prevents the moisture in the wood from freezing into solid blocks.
Oh, wow.
Instead, as the water pushes out of the pores of the wood and hits the freezing air, it crystallizes into these incredibly fine, microscopic hairs of ice. It's literally weather being sculpted by a fungus.
That's incredible. And, human beings generate our own atmospheric anomalies, too. Consider the phenomenon known colloquially in the Midwestern United States as corn sweat.
Corn sweat. Wait, weather created by vegetables.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
In states heavily dominated by agriculture, millions of acres of corn plants absorb water from the soil and release it into the air.
Through transpiration, right.
Exactly, evapotranspiration. A single acre of corn can release up to 4,000 gallons of water a day.
Good grief.
Multiply that by millions of acres. And humans have inadvertently engineered a localized, superhuman weather system that physically alters the heat index of an entire region.
So if weather includes volcanic floods, fungal ice sculptures, and vegetable sweat, defining it as just water falling from the sky is clearly inadequate.
Highly inadequate.
And we can't even limit the definition to planet Earth. If you look up, the entire solar system is churning with weather.
Oh, absolutely. Jupiter has the Great Red Spot.
Right, that massive storm.
Yeah, it's an anticyclonic storm of hydrogen and helium that's been raging for at least 300 years. It is wide enough to swallow the Earth whole,
Which is just hard to even visualize.
with peripheral winds howling at over 250 miles per hour. And Saturn features a frozen fog of ammonia ice suspended high in its upper atmosphere.
And if you travel out to the ice giants Neptune and Uranus, it gets even weirder. The atmospheric pressure and the chemical composition are so extreme that it fundamentally alters the state of matter.
It's mind-bending.
Deep in the atmosphere, the pressure crushes methane molecules, separating the carbon atoms, which then compress into actual diamonds. It literally rains diamonds, sinking through a liquid mantle.
It sounds like a fantasy novel, but it's just the meteorological reality of our neighborhood.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched space weather.
Oh, right, like solar flares.
Exactly. Coronal mass ejections from the sun are literal blasts of radioactive plasma shooting out across the vacuum of space.
And when that hits us...
When that plasma collides with Earth's magnetic field, the interaction of those charged particles with our atmospheric gases creates the aurora borealis. The northern lights are essentially weather that traveled almost 100 million miles to get here.
That is wild. And just as weather stretches across space, it also stretches across time. If you went back to the Earth of, say, 3 billion years ago, you wouldn't recognize the sky at all.
No, not at all. There is a famous paleoclimatological puzzle called the faint young sun paradox.
Okay, what is that?
Astrophysics tells us that billions of years ago, our sun was significantly weaker, emitting about 20% less energy than it does today.
So Earth should have been freezing.
Exactly. By the standard laws of thermodynamics, early Earth should have been a frozen, solid ball of ice. Liquid water, and therefore traditional rain, should have been utterly impossible.
But the fossil record and geological strata prove that liquid water was flowing and raining down.
Which means the atmosphere was doing something radically different to trap that meager sunlight. The skies weren't blue.
What color were they?
They might have been a hazy orange, filled with methane, potentially raining liquid down through a pink sulfur fog. The atmosphere acted as an extreme greenhouse.
Wow. So if weather isn't just water, and it isn't just on Earth, and it isn't even historically consistent, how do we corral it into a definition? So what does this all mean?
Well, the default scientific approach, particularly among meteorologists dealing with fluid dynamics, is to view weather as nothing more than a giant physical and chemical reaction.
Like a lab experiment.
Yeah, imagine the Earth as a universe-sized Florence flask sitting on a Bunsen burner. The sun provides the heat. The gases in the flask swirl around due to thermal convection.
Right.
Moisture evaporates, condenses when it hits colder areas, and falls back out of the solution. If you look at it that way, weather is just chemistry. It's just thermodynamic molecules bumping into each other.
I mean, that is a highly functional model for a supercomputer trying to predict tomorrow's rainfall.
Yes, very practical.
But from a philosophical standpoint, reducing weather strictly to fluid dynamics feels like a massive failure. It completely strips away what philosophers call the phenomenology of the weather.
Exactly. Phenomenology is the rigorous study of the first-person subjective human experience.
Meaning what it feels like.
More than just physical sensation, though. It's about what a rainstorm is like to experience as a conscious being.
Right, the mood of it.
A storm isn't just a drop in barometric pressure. It alters the light in your living room. It changes the smell of the pavement. It dictates whether you feel cozy or anxious.
Because a Florence flask doesn't care if it's raining inside of it. Humans do.
Spot on. Reducing weather to a chemical equation completely ignores the human dimension that actually gives weather its meaning in our lives.
I see. And we also have to draw some strict boundaries around what weather is not. People conflate weather, seasons, and climate all the time. But there is a rigid distinction.
As the old adage goes, climate is what we expect, weather is what we get.
Love that.
Climate is a longitudinal probability. It is an abstract statistical average compiled over decades. You cannot step outside and feel a climate.
Right, you can only feel the weather, which is the immediate, highly localized, short-term reality you are currently standing in.
Exactly. And seasons are the astronomical mechanism, the tilt of the Earth.
Mm.
But weather is the daily execution of that mechanism.
But I'm still struggling to pin down a working definition. Let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Go for it.
If I look at the truly wild phenomena of fire tornadoes spinning out of bushfires in Australia, or brinicles, which are these terrifying underwater ice stalactites that plunge down to the seafloor and flash freeze any starfish they touch.
Oh, brinicles are horrifying.
Right. They don't feel like chemistry, they feel like Dungeons and Dragons elementals. From a practical human standpoint, isn't weather really just the chaotic stuff that gets in our way?
You know, your intuition is actually leading us directly to the foundational definition we need.
Really?
Think about what a fire tornado and a rainstorm have in common. They are not merely passive states of the atmosphere, they are active forces.
Okay.
The best working definition of weather is that it is a dynamic, physical, and conceptual force that exists entirely outside of our control, and crucially, it pushes back against us.
It pushes back against us. It isn't a canvas we walk in front of. It's an active participant that dictates our movements.
Yes, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, because weather is this uncontrollable force constantly pushing against humanity, ancient cultures didn't just see it as an inconvenience.
They saw it as an intentional force.
Exactly. If a massive storm wipes out your entire harvest, and you don't have a satellite radar to explain the low-pressure system, you don't just shrug. You have to invent a reason.
You inevitably link that uncontrollable force to something supernatural, to fate and to time.
And you can see that braided into the very language we use today. The etymological roots are staggering.
Oh, I love this part.
The Old English word for weather, is a direct homophone for the word weather, W-H-E-T-H-E-R.
As in, whether or not something will happen.
Exactly. Both in English and in German, the words share this phonetic and a historical link to the concept of alternatives, chance, and probability.
There's a brilliant nod to this in Norton Juster's classic children's book, The Phantom Tollbooth.
Oh, great book.
The protagonist meets a character called the Weatherman, and the Weatherman explicitly states that he doesn't care what the weather will be. He only cares whether there will be weather.
That is so clever. It reveals a deep linguistic intuition. To agrarian societies, the weather was the ultimate roll of the dice. Your survival depended entirely on chance.
Right.
But it goes deeper than just probability. It links directly to our perception of time. Consider ancient Greek. We are all familiar with the Greek word chronos, which is where we get chronological.
Chronos is strict, mechanical clock time. Tick, tock. 1 second follows the next. Indifferent to human experience.
But the Greeks had a second, entirely different word for time. Kairos. And kairos isn't clock time. It is opportune time. It's the concept of timeliness.
So kairos is the exact moment the wind finally dies down so the archer can release the bowstring.
Exactly. It is the specific window when the spring thaw allows you to plant the wheat. And modern Greek speakers still use the word kairos interchangeably for both time and weather.
Really?
Yeah. If you ask a Greek speaker about the kairos, you are simultaneously asking, what is the weather doing? And what kind of times are we living in?
That is beautiful. And the Latin word tempestas performs the exact same dual function. It translates to time, but it also translates to weather, and more specifically, to a violent storm.
Right, the root of tempest in tempo.
For most of human history, time, luck, and weather were not separate scientific categories. They were one single braided experience of human vulnerability.
And naturally, because weather represented time and luck and absolute terrifying power, it wasn't assigned to the minor deities in mythology.
No, the weather gods are the heavy hitters. They are the chief executives of the pantheon.
Always.
You have Zeus, who rules the sky and wields lightning bolts for the Greeks. Thor and his thunder hammer for the Norse.
Indra, in Hindu mythology, the king of the Devas, who wields a lightning thunderbolt and brings the rains.
In Mayan lore, you have Chark, the rain god, who is conceptualized as 4 gods at once, representing the 4 cardinal directions the wind and rain can assault you from, and the Aztec equivalent, Tlaloc, the supreme god of the rains.
What is philosophically critical about these mythological hierarchies is how they establish distance. Look at how Homer describes Mount Olympus in the Odyssey.
Okay, the home of the gods.
Olympus is the supreme home of the Greek gods, and Homer explicitly deliberately states that on Olympus, there is no weather.
Wait, really?
None. There's no rain, no snow, no howling wind. It is bathed in a perfect, eternal, cloudless radiance.
Olympus has the ultimate perfect thermostat. I found that detail so profound in the source material. The gods control the weather, they weaponize it, but they never have to experience it themselves.
Never. Weather is strictly a mortal affliction. It is the agent of chaos that the gods hurl down at humanity to remind us that we are fleshy, vulnerable, and absolutely not in charge.
Weather is the great humbling mechanism of the universe. And because it's the ultimate symbol of humanity's lack of control, it has saturated our literature and culture as the go-to metaphor for chaos.
Think of Shakespeare's Macbeth. Whenever the three witches appear, they are accompanied by thunder and lightning. The weather physically manifests the upending of the natural moral order of the kingdom.
Or look at modern cinema, like the movie Twister.
Hmm.
The tornadoes in that film aren't just swirling wind. They're characterized almost as malevolent, chaotic monsters that the humans are entirely at the mercy of.
It even drives our music and our political movements. Look at Bob Dylan's Wings Lit lyric, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows."
He wasn't talking about a cold front.
No, he was talking about sensing massive political and social upheaval. That single weather metaphor was so potent, it literally inspired the name of the radical 1970s political group, the Weather Underground.
And just think about how baked into your everyday vernacular it is. When your team at work has a sudden burst of collaborative ideas, you don't call it a thought gathering, you call it a brainstorm.
Right.
When you feel physically ill, you are under the weather. When an army uses overwhelming, terrifying speed to crush an opponent, it is a blitzkrieg, literally a lightning war.
We use the weather to describe our moods, our economies, and our wars because it is the most visceral example we have of an uncontrollable force.
Which raises an important question. If weather is this ultimate mortal affliction, this profound agent of chaos, how exactly does it interact with the physical realities of our lives? How does it tear down and subsequently build up our human societies?
To understand that, we have to look at how we measure the damage when the weather pushes back. There is a deeply harrowing account from Benjamin Hale regarding the 2013 floods in Boulder, Colorado.
Oh, this story is intense.
It really is. He describes waking up early one morning after days of relentless heavy rain. He smells damp earth inside his house. He walks down the stairs to his split-level basement.
Yeah.
And he describes this terrifying optical illusion that happens when water occupies a space where it absolutely shouldn't be. He rounds the corner and the walls look strangely short. The floor is entirely dark and perfectly reflective. And then his brain clicks and he realizes he is looking at a domestic lake. His entire basement has become a dark swimming pool. The water is up to the door handles.
It is a devastating claustrophobic image. He describes wading into this freezing, filthy water and seeing his family's memories, their photograph albums, their keepsakes floating around in plastic bins on the surface.
That single flood caused billions of dollars in damage across the community, completely rewiring the geography of the town.
And analyzing that trauma reveals that when weather hits us, it doesn't just hit us in one-dimensional way. It inflicts distinct moral categories of loss. It's not just a dollar amount.
Right, there are layers to it.
First, obviously, there is material property loss. Warped wood, melted roof tar, cars smashed by hail. But then, far more seriously, there is the loss of human health and life.
And surprisingly, it isn't the dramatic tornadoes that kill the most people.
No.
Statistically, heat waves are the deadliest weather events globally, acting as a silent, creeping killer, especially among the elderly.
That's sobering. And beyond the physical toll, there is the psychological trauma, the lasting, invisible anxiety of losing your sanctuary. Every time it rains heavily after a flood, survivors experience a spike in cortisol.
There's also the destruction of livelihoods. When a freak freeze wipes out an entire citrus crop, or a hurricane levels a coastal fishery, people lose their ability to feed their families.
There's the profound loss of sentimental keepsakes, the unreplaceable anchors of our identity, like the family photos in that flooded basement.
And finally, there is aesthetic chaos. The sheer visual grief of seeing a beautiful ancient forest or a beloved city block torn to shreds.
But analyzing these categories presents a really fascinating philosophical puzzle. It is sometimes called the big bad wolf puzzle, or the tree falling in the forest puzzle.
Right, the measurement problems.
Exactly. The argument is that it's practically and perhaps logically impossible to truly objectively quantify storm damage. Because how do you weigh these different categories against each other?
You really can't.
How do you compare the loss of $1 billion in commercial property to the loss of a single human life? It isn't an apples to oranges comparison. It is an apples to orangutans comparison. They exist in entirely different moral universes.
Furthermore, even if we try to focus strictly on quantitative metrics, the hard numbers, those metrics are incredibly skewed by human variables.
How so?
Imagine a massive F5 tornado touches down in an entirely empty stretch of desert. The monetary damage is effectively zero. Now imagine a much weaker F2 tornado hits a densely packed, incredibly wealthy suburban neighborhood. The monetary damage is in the billions.
Oh, wow, right.
Our metrics for how bad a storm is are skewed heavily by where we chose to build our infrastructure, the density of our populations, and the wealth of the victims.
Not to mention medical advances. A storm in 1920 might have killed 100 people due to injuries and infections. That exact same storm today might kill 0 people because we have helicopters, antibiotics, and advanced trauma centers.
The storm didn't get less severe. Human medicine just got better.
And even insurance data is biased. Wealthy homeowners file massive insurance claims that enter the national databases. Low-income renters who lose everything might not have renter's insurance, so their catastrophic losses mathematically disappear from the official damage reports.
This subjectivity infects even our most rigorous scientific models. Consider the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale, category 1 through 5.
That sounds completely objective, just wind speed, right?
To the public, yes. It sounds like pure, objective meteorological data based strictly on sustained wind speed. But when the National Hurricane Center communicates a Category 5 storm, they don't just broadcast winds exceeding 157 miles per hour.
What else do they say?
They explicitly translate that wind speed into human vulnerability. The official description says things like, a high percentage of framed homes will be destroyed, or power outages will last for weeks to possibly months. They define the weather by how it will dismantle human engineering.
So what does this all mean for the data we consume on the news? If storm damage statistics are this deeply entangled with modern infrastructure, wealth disparity, and insurance claim rates, how can you or I trust disaster statistics at all?
It becomes very tricky.
Because if the data is so subjective, it becomes incredibly vulnerable to political exploitation. We see lobbyists or politicians point to skyrocketing financial damages to claim storms are getting apocalyptically worse.
Right.
Or conversely, they point to lower modern death rates to claim the exact same storms aren't a big deal anymore. They can spin the numbers however they want by ignoring the underlying human variables.
And just reporting on the text here, that is a critical observation to maintain. The raw, quantitative metrics of weather damage are easily manipulated to serve various agendas because they conflate so many different moral categories of loss.
The numbers masquerade as objective truth, but they are deeply inherently subjective.
And historically, this profound, undeniable impact of weather on human survival and economics has led philosophers and scientists down some very dark, very dangerous intellectual paths.
Right. Because weather clearly dictates so much of our lives, historical thinkers started to look at the data and form a radical hypothesis. They started to suspect that weather didn't just happen to us as an external obstacle.
They began to theorize that weather inherently created who we are at a biological and moral level.
On a macroeconomic level, this is obvious. Weather undeniably dictates industry. A town like Boulder, Colorado thrives economically because its winter weather supports a massive ski industry. Coastal towns build their entire economy around sunshine and beach tourism.
And weather has undeniably dictated massive historical outcomes. Look at military history. Napoleon's army, the greatest fighting force of its time, was catastrophically bogged down in the mud at Waterloo after heavy rains, allowing the coalition forces time to organize.
The entire success of the D-Day invasion in World War II relied on a tiny, precarious window of acceptable weather forecasted by Allied meteorologists.
And perhaps the most chilling example of weather-changing history is the fate of Kokura, Japan.
Oh, this story.
The Kura was the primary target for the second atomic bomb. The bomber flew over the city, but it was obscured by heavy cloud cover. Because their orders required visual confirmation of the target, they flew past Kokura and dropped the bomb on the secondary target.
Nagasaki.
Yes. A localized cloud formation spared tens of thousands of lives in one city and doomed tens of thousands in another.
The weather shapes human destiny. But taking that undeniable fact, historical thinkers stretched it into a deeply problematic ideology known as environmental determinism.
This is the belief that the specific climate and weather of a region absolutely biologically dictate the racial, cultural, and moral superiority of the people who were born there.
And the history of this idea goes back thousands of years. The ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, who gave us the Hippocratic Oath, genuinely believed that the temperature of the air and the quality of the water in a region directly unbalanced the bodily humors.
Blood, phlegm, yellow, and black bile.
Right. He argued that the climate literally determined whether a population was courageous and warlike or lazy and submissive. Fast forward to the Islamic Golden Age, and you have polymaths like Avicenna warning that living near stagnant water or breathing in cabbage air would fundamentally alter a person's neurological temperament.
The theory only became more insidious during the European Enlightenment. You had highly influential philosophers like Montesquieu and David Hume arguing that the cold, harsh climates of Northern Europe biologically forced the people there to become naturally industrious.
Because if they didn't prepare for winter, they died.
Exactly. Yeah. Conversely, they argued that hot, tropical climates provided abundant food year-round, which supposedly bred laziness, promiscuity, and a lack of intellectual rigor.
It was a pseudoscientific justification for racism. Thomas Jefferson actually adopted this exact logic. He used the climate of North America to justify the British colonization of the continent.
He argued that the temperate weather perfectly suited the supposedly superior industrious temperament of the Anglo-Saxon settlers over the indigenous populations.
And this ideology reached its most horrific, catastrophic peak in the 20th century with Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party.
Yes, their ideology of Lebensraum, meaning living space,
Hmm.
and the concept of blood and soil, were deeply rooted in environmental determinism.
They believed that the German people were biologically morally superior specifically because they were forged by the specific environment and climate of the German homeland.
Therefore, according to their twisted logic, this environmentally ordained master race naturally required and deserved more geographic territory to sustain itself.
It is genuinely terrifying how a theory about temperature and rainfall was weaponized to justify global atrocities.
Truly.
And it's worth noting that while we universally reject the Nazi extreme, softer versions of this deterministic thinking still echo today. You see it in geographical arguments like Jared Diamond's famous book, Guns, Germs, and Steel.
Right, which argues that the primary reason certain Eurasian civilizations were able to conquer others wasn't due to inherent intelligence, but strictly due to geographic, climatic, and environmental advantages that provided better crops and domesticable animals.
It is vital to remember as we discuss this that we are exploring how these historical theories evolved and were weaponized, not endorsing their validity. We're just imparting what the source texts highlight.
Absolutely. The intellectual history of humanity actually features a massive philosophical rebellion against this idea. Geography and sociology eventually shifted away from determinism, the depressing idea that the weather robs us of our agency and dictates our destiny.
And move toward a concept called possibilism.
Yes. Possibilism argues that while the climate and weather certainly constrain us and limit the menu of options available to us, humans still possess the ultimate agency to choose how we respond to those constraints.
And I think biology provides the ultimate pushback against the determinists here. Think about how incredibly adaptable humans and animals are to extreme weather. We don't just melt in the heat or freeze in the cold.
Animals evolve hibernation to survive the winter, or estivation to sleep through blistering heat waves.
Humans have sweat glands to regulate our core temperature. And beyond biology, we have our minds. We don't just sit passively in a field and let the weather mold our character. We invent things. Adaptability, not determinism, is the true defining characteristic of humanity.
Precisely. And that transition, embracing human agency and rejecting the idea that we are passive victims of the sky, leads us directly to the technologies we build to change our relationship with the weather.
There is a really delightful anecdote from Hale that captures this shift perfectly. He talks about a time he took his young son to the bus stop.
Oh, this is a great story.
Now, this kid had spent his entire life in the dry, arid, high-altitude climate of Colorado, where it rarely rains. But on this particular morning, it's pouring. So the father reaches into the closet, pulls out an umbrella, and opens it up over them.
And the son is absolutely mesmerized. He is staring up at the nylon canopy like it is alien technology.
He had never really seen an umbrella in action. To him, it was magic. It was a portable, dry microclimate that followed him down the street. It was a shield against the sky.
That anecdote perfectly illustrates a profound truth. Technology makes the weather invisible to us. It creates a barrier between our soft animal bodies and the brutal physical world.
Right.
And historically, humanity has adopted three primary dispositional orientations toward the weather. These are the three different stances we have taken as a species to manage our vulnerability.
And they track incredibly well with the three major agricultural revolutions in human history. Let's unpack these three orientations. The first one is the most basic, accepting it.
Right. This aligns with the first agricultural revolution, the Neolithic Revolution, which happened roughly 12,000 years ago. When humans transitioned from being nomadic hunter-gatherers to settling down in the Fertile Crescent to grow crops, they fundamentally changed their relationship with the weather.
A nomad can walk away from a drought. A
Fuck.
farmer cannot.
Exactly. They became entirely dependent on the cyclical monsoon seasons. If the rains came, the village ate. If the rains failed, the village starved. They had no technology to move water on a massive scale, so they had to simply accept what the sky provided.
Philosophically, you see this attitude mirrored centuries later in Stoicism. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about how you cannot control outward physical events, like a freezing winter or a ruined crop. You can only control your internal reaction to it.
You accept the weather as an indifferent fact of the universe.
But eventually, just accepting a famine because the sky didn't rain isn't a viable long-term strategy for a growing civilization. So humanity moved to the second orientation, resisting it.
This maps roughly onto the Second Agricultural Revolution, the British Agricultural Revolution spanning the 17th to 19th centuries. This wasn't just about inventing better plows, it was about inventing conceptual technology to resist the weather's financial ruin.
Like insurance.
Yes. Farmers learned to pool their risks through crop rotation and early forms of insurance. If one farmer's wheat was flattened by a localized hailstorm, the broader community shared the surplus from the undamaged farms. They resisted the economic impact of the weather.
And they got much better at resisting the physical elements, too. The text traces the evolution of human shelter and clothing. We go all the way back to the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, who basically wrote early survival guides.
Right.
He gave farmers strict instructions on how to stitch together oxhide boots and line them with felt to survive the brutal winter frostbite. From Hesiod's oxhide boots to the modern moisture-wicking Gore-Tex fabrics we wear today, or the massive concrete levees we build to hold back storm surges, we are no longer just accepting the weather.
We are actively pushing back. We are building a fortress.
Which naturally leads to the third and most aggressive modern orientation, harnessing it. We don't just want to hide in our fortress. We look at the storm and say, how can I put that to work for me?
This is deeply associated with the Green Revolution of the mid-20th century. Humanity developed high-yield crops, synthetic fertilizers, and massive continent-spanning irrigation projects. We stopped relying on local rainfall.
The sheer scale of this harnessing today is staggering. For example, Saudi Arabia actually purchases massive tracts of desert land in Arizona.
Yes, this is wild.
They use the deeply contested water from the Colorado River to grow water-intensive alfalfa crops, which they then ship back to the Middle East to feed dairy cows. They are effectively harnessing and exporting the American weather to a different continent.
We build thousands of windmills to catch the gale-force winds. We blanket our roofs in photovoltaic solar panels to capture the solar radiation.
The text even mentions scientific attempts to capture the energy of lightning, reminding us that a single average lightning bolt contains roughly 1.21 gigawatts of electricity, which, as any Back to the Future fan knows, is exactly the amount of power you need to run a flux capacitor.
I love that connection.
We are looking at the raw, terrifying power of Zeus and trying to figure out how to plug our laptops into it.
To understand this philosophically, we have to look at the modern framework of ecosystem services. This is how contemporary economists and policymakers evaluate the natural world. They categorize nature into 4 distinct services.
Okay, what are they?
There are provisioning services, like rainfall filling our reservoirs with drinking water. Regulating services, like global wind currents pollinating massive agricultural zones. Supporting services, like weather driving the nutrient cycling in the soil. And cultural services, like the snowpack that entirely supports the multi-billion-dollar ski and recreation industry.
It turns the majestic, terrifying natural world into a spreadsheet of economic assets.
Exactly. And there is a profound philosophical critique of this mindset. The 20th century philosopher Martin Heidegger was deeply troubled by this. He looked at a massive hydroelectric dam that had been built across the mighty Rhine River in Germany.
Okay.
And Heidegger argued that when we dam a river to extract its electricity, a psychological shift occurs. We stop seeing the river as a magnificent, untamed part of nature. We reduce it to what he called a standing reserve.
A standing reserve, like an inventory waiting to be used.
Yes. Think about how you view the battery percentage on your smartphone. You don't marvel at the complex lithium-ion chemistry. You just see a utility that is either serving you or failing you.
Right.
Heidegger argued that by harnessing the weather and the environment so efficiently, it just becomes a factory for human consumption. We deeply alienate ourselves from the natural world because we only value it for its utility.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, though. I hear Heidegger's critique. I understand the spiritual loss of turning a river into a battery, but isn't this romantic idea of going back to nature and letting the Rhine River run wild? Isn't that just a massive modern luxury?
Oh, how so?
The author mentions how college students love to romanticize a simpler agrarian world without technology, but they are having this debate while sitting inside an air-conditioned, steel-reinforced lecture hall, completely protected from the brutal heat and the freezing rain outside.
That's a very fair point.
We can only afford to romanticize nature because we've successfully built giant technological walls to keep nature from killing us.
That is a very sharp pushback, and it acts as the perfect bridge into the next major concept. You're entirely right that our attempts to resist and harness the weather have successfully insulated us from the raw brutality of nature. We don't freeze to death in our homes very often anymore. But in building those massive technological walls, we haven't actually eliminated danger. We've simply transmuted it. We've created an entirely new, deeply modern type of danger.
Welcome to the Risk Society.
The concept of the risk society was developed by sociologists Ulrich Beck and Anthony Giddens. Their core thesis is that pre-industrial societies faced natural dangers. You worried about a wolf eating your sheep, or a drought ruining your wheat, or a hurricane blowing down your wooden house.
But modern, highly industrialized societies face what they call manufactured risks.
Yes, manufactured risks, meaning the very technologies we construct to protect us from the natural world become the exact things that might catastrophically destroy us.
Let's go back to Heidegger's hydroelectric dam for a second. A valley town floods every spring, ruining crops and drowning livestock. It is a natural danger. So human ingenuity builds a massive, million-ton concrete dam across the river. The natural problem is solved.
Right, the town never floods, and they get free electricity.
But they have instantly generated a manufactured risk. Because if there is an unprecedented earthquake or a catastrophic engineering failure, the dam will collapse. And instead of a seasonal flood, a 100-foot wall of water will wipe the entire town off the face of the earth in 10 minutes.
By trying to eliminate our natural vulnerability, we traded it for a massive technological vulnerability.
And the text makes a really fascinating linguistic and conceptual distinction here to help us understand this. It differentiates between a hazard and a risk, because we use those words interchangeably in normal conversation, but mathematically and historically, they are completely different.
It is a vital distinction.
Yeah.
A hazard is simply a danger that exists out in the world. It is a pitfall, a venomous snake, a sudden blizzard. The English word hazard actually derives from the Arabic word al-zar, which translates to the dice.
The dice. I love that. It implies pure, blind luck, the fickle, uncaring nature of the universe rolling the dice on your life.
But a risk is something entirely different. A risk is a mathematical probability. It is the calculated statistical likelihood of that hazard actually occurring. And this is a very modern invention.
Wow.
For almost the entirety of human history, weather was a hazard. You endured it. It was only during the Enlightenment, with the advent of statistical mathematics, actuarial tables, and the scientific method, that humanity could take chaotic, unpredictable weather and mathematically flatten it into a calculated risk.
I want you, the listener, to just pause and imagine what life was like before statistics. Imagine living in a world where a dark cloud on the horizon wasn't a 20% chance of rain on Tuesday. It was a sudden, terrifying act of the gods.
The unpredictability must have been exhausting.
It could water your crops, or it could unleash a hailstorm that destroyed your entire year's food supply in 20 minutes, and you had absolutely zero mathematical framework to prepare for it. The psychological burden of living in a world of pure hazard must have been paralyzing.
To manage that paralyzing fear, to transition from a world of hazard into a manageable world of risk, humanity desperately needed a way to see into the future. We had to invent the science of meteorology. We had to learn how to read the skies.
And the history of humanity trying to predict the weather is absurd, brilliant, and honestly a little hilarious. The author starts this section with an anecdote about a local TV weatherman in Tucson, Arizona, named Michael Goodrich.
Oh, this is great.
For 9 months out of the year, his daily broadcast forecast was incredibly simple. He would just say the word hot.
It perfectly encapsulates the modern cultural trope of the mocked meteorologist. Think of the classic Bill Murray movie Groundhog Day, where the cynical weatherman is treated as a joke, a guy whose job is so irrelevant he delegates it to a literal rodent.
Right. We constantly mock meteorologists for ruining our weekend picnic plans, but looking at the history shows that predicting the weather is one of the oldest, most desperate intellectual endeavors of the human species. People tried literally everything to find a pattern in the chaos.
They really did. The ancient Inca Empire carefully tracked the brightness of the Pleiades star cluster in the night sky to decide exactly when to plant their potato crops.
And what is amazing is that modern science has vindicated them. The brightness of the Pleiades was actually obscured by high-altitude cirrus clouds, which are a strong early indicator of an El Niño weather pattern. They were doing highly advanced atmospheric tracking disguised as astrology.
In ancient Hawaii, navigators and farmers looked at the horns of the crescent moon. If the horns pointed up, the moon was holding water, meaning dry weather. If the horns pointed down, the moon was spilling out rain.
The ancient Chinese used oracle bones. They would write questions about the weather on turtle shells, apply a hot poker until the shell cracked, and read the cracks to divine the future.
And the ancient Greeks, despite their philosophical advancements, had a whole menu of bizarre divination techniques. There was sternomancy, which involved predicting the coming winter by reading the bumps and ridges on the breastbone of a sacrificed animal.
Yeah.
Or hippomancy, which involved watching the specific behavior and movements of horses to predict a storm. The Greek philosopher Theophrastus, who was Aristotle's successor, wrote an entire manual on forecasting called On Weather Signs.
He claimed with utter sincerity that you could predict high winds if you saw a dog rolling on the ground, or predict a particularly harsh winter if you noticed the sheep mating earlier than usual.
It sounds like pure superstition to us now. It sounds like magic. But they were being foolish. They were desperately trying to find reliable patterns in a chaotic system so they wouldn't starve.
But then the Renaissance and the scientific revolution happen, and we see a massive fundamental shift away from magic and toward the naturalization of the weather.
Aristotle steps in with his theory of the four elements: earth, air, fire, water. And he proposes this bizarre but structurally brilliant theory of how rainbows work.
Right, he thought there were reflections.
Yeah, he theorized that rainbows were literally reflections, like a massive mirror in the clouds bouncing light back from our eyes to the sun. Now, the optics were entirely backwards, but what matters is that he was trying to explain the rainbow physically, mechanically, not supernaturally, as a bridge built by the gods.
And we begin to see the earliest, highly lucrative, practical applications of this naturalized forecasting. There is a famous story about the early philosopher Thales of Miletus. He was constantly mocked by his peers for being a poor intellectual, the classic, if you're so smart, why aren't you rich argument.
Yes.
So Thales used his extensive knowledge of astronomy and cyclical weather patterns to predict that the upcoming autumn would produce a massive, record-breaking olive harvest. During the winter, when demand was zero, he bought the rights to use every single olive press in the region for a fraction of the cost.
A total monopoly.
When autumn came and the massive harvest he predicted arrived, everyone desperately needed an olive press. Thales rented them out at a premium and became incredibly wealthy simply to prove a point about applied meteorology.
The ultimate revenge of the nerds, 600 BC edition. He literally weaponized the weather forecast. And moving forward, the absolute legends of the scientific revolution were all completely obsessed with the weather.
Johannes Kepler, the brilliant astronomer who figured out the laws of planetary motion, wrote an entire scientific treatise, an ode, really, to the six-cornered snowflake, essentially founding the science of crystallography.
Galilei, the father of modern observational astronomy, invented the thermoscope, which was the direct precursor to the modern liquid thermometer.
What is philosophically vital to understand about this enlightening science is how it fundamentally shifted the moral burden of the weather off the shoulders of humanity.
Yes, this is a huge point.
When Galileo and Kepler proved that weather is just a mechanical process like giant invisible billiard balls of pressure and temperature crashing into each other in the atmosphere, rather than a supernatural punishment, you free humanity from a crushing psychological weight.
If a massive drought ruins your harvest, it is no longer your fault because you secretly angered the gods or committed a sin. It's just an area of high atmospheric pressure. The naturalization of weather was a profound moral liberation.
It is amazing to realize that the greatest, most celebrated minds in human history, René Descartes, or Isaac Newton, Blaise Pascal, they were all in their laboratories inventing barometers, tracking humidity, and measuring air pressure. Figuring out how to accurately predict the rain was the original space race. It was the absolute cutting edge of the human intellect.
But as our meteorological tools became sharper, as our supercomputers became faster, the text argues that a very strange alienation began to occur.
How so?
Our very language and the precise numbers we invented to measure the weather began to isolate us from the raw, lived experience of it. We gained predictive power, but we lost our sensory connection to the sky.
This brings up one of my absolute favorite linguistic myths, which the text tackles head-on, the famous idea that Eskimos have 50 words for snow.
Right, everyone has heard that.
The author refers to this as a journalistic snow clone, a catchy cliche that gets endlessly repeated in pop psychology without any real evidence. The truth is that the Inuit languages are polysynthetic. They string root words together so they can technically create infinite words for anything.
But the deeper, more profound truth is that every culture dynamically creates language to define their specific, localized weather reality. You don't need to go to the Arctic.
Exactly. The author points to recreational skiers in Colorado who have generated dozens of highly specific words for snow to navigate their reality. They talk about corduroy for freshly groomed trails, snert, which is a dirty mix of snow and dirt, crud for heavily tracked snow, and mashed potatoes for wet, heavy slush.
The vocabulary we possess physically dictates what we are able to perceive in the environment. The text cites a fascinating episode of the Radiolab podcast that explored this concept by looking at ancient Greek texts, specifically Homer's Odyssey.
Homer famously describes the ocean as wine dark, but he never once calls it blue. He describes sheep as purple and honey as green.
And the leading linguistic theory is that because the ancient Greeks had not yet invented a specific culturally agreed-upon word for the color blue, their brains might not have physically parsed it out from the visual spectrum in the same distinct way our modern brains do. Language literally carves out the boundaries of our physical reality.
If you don't have a word for a specific type of weather, you barely notice it happening. And just as our language can isolate out our reality, our reliance on hard numbers isolates us from our own physical experience. Think about this incredibly common modern scenario.
Okay.
Your grandma is sitting in your living room in December. She is shivering. She pulls a blanket over her shoulders and she complains, "It's freezing in here." And you, armed with modern technology, look at your digital smart thermostat on the wall and you say, "Actually, Grandma, it is exactly 68 degrees objectively. You're wrong. It isn't cold." We literally use numbers to invalidate a human being's physical experience. We completely forget the ancient wisdom of the Greek philosopher Protagoras, who famously said, "Man is the measure of all things." The objective fact of 68 degrees does not matter at all if Grandma physically feels cold. The number has alienated us from the phenomenology of the room.
But chopping the majestic, terrifying weather up into statistical probabilities, degrees Fahrenheit, and color-coded radar maps on our iPhones, we have successfully demystified it. We have conquered the ancient terror of the gods throwing lightning bolts. We are safe.
But in achieving that safety, we have lost something vital. We have lost our awe.
And to make matters even more complicated, our modern predictive supremacy, this mathematical fortress we've built, is currently facing a massive crisis. The text discusses a terrifying concept called no analog futures.
Because the climate of the Earth is fundamentally changing. And, just to be clear, we are strictly impartially reporting the text's meteorological analysis here regarding the difficulties of modern forecasting.
Of course. The point being made is that the baseline of the atmosphere is shifting. Meteorologists rely entirely on historical analogs. They look at the radar and say, well, in 1998, when the wind shear did this and the pressure dropped to this, it rained. Therefore, it will rain tomorrow.
But when the fundamental physics of the atmosphere absorb more heat, the old historical analogs don't work anymore. The atmosphere is behaving in ways it never has in recorded history.
We can't predict the future because the past is no longer a reliable mathematical guide. Furthermore, the text points out a brilliant sociological paradox. Weather prediction involving humans is fundamentally indeterminate. It suffers from a massive sociological feedback loop.
It's like the observer effect in quantum physics. The act of looking at the particle changes how the particle behaves.
Exactly. Imagine a meteorologist sees a massive hurricane forming and predicts it will be the storm of the century. The government issues warnings, millions of people evacuate the coastline, windows are boarded up, and emergency supplies are staged. The storm hits, it destroys buildings, but the death toll is zero. In the aftermath, the public looks at the zero death toll, looks at the billions of dollars spent on evacuation, and loudly complains, the meteorologist was wrong, it wasn't a deadly disaster at all.
The paradox is that the act of successfully predicting the disaster physically changed the reality on the ground, making the disaster less deadly, which in turn makes the initial prediction look like an overreaction.
So the meteorologist is actively punished by the public for saving their lives. That is a brutal, unsolvable paradox.
Which brings us to the ultimate unifying thesis of Benjamin Hale's fascinating book. Weather is a chaotic but fundamentally law-like force. We have spent thousands of years, from the Neolithic Revolution to the Enlightenment, building physical shields, linguistic boundaries, and mathematical models to protect our soft bodies from it.
We have successfully reduced the terrifying wrath of Zeus to a push notification of a 20% chance of precipitation on our smartwatches.
We've gone from ancient Greeks, terrified of a thunderstorm, sacrificing sheep to appease the sky, to Benjamin Hale, floating around his flooded boulder basement in an inner tube, sipping gin, which is a real anecdote he shares about coping with a disaster.
A very human way to cope.
We've traced the incredible journey of human adaptation, from the invention of the umbrella to the complex realities of the risk society to the deeply alienating philosophy of the digital thermometer. We have taken the ultimate mundane small talk topic from the office party and revealed it as the invisible, dynamic scaffolding of human civilization.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought that builds on everything we've explored today. We are currently entering a technological era where quantum supercomputers and artificial intelligence are getting infinitely better at predicting the weather.
It's incredible how fast the tech is moving.
There are even serious geoengineering proposals being debated today to fully control it. Ideas about injecting aerosols into the atmosphere to dim the sun, or using technology to manually steer hurricanes away from cities. As we inch closer to achieving this ultimate mastery over the atmosphere, we have to ask a profound philosophical question. When we finally conquer nature, achieving the ultimate safety, will we have won? Or will we simply trap ourselves inside a perfectly engineered, perfectly predictable, entirely sterile global shopping mall?
Will we completely alienate ourselves from the very chaotic, unpredictable force that challenged us, forced us to invent, and drove human evolution in the first place?
Something to think about.
Wow. A perfectly sterile global shopping mall, no hazard, no dice rolls, no kairos, no magic. Just a perfectly regulated, mathematically guaranteed 68 degrees forever. It really makes you rethink that awkward conversation at the office party, doesn't it? The next time Cly from accounting comes up to you over the deviled eggs and says, beautiful weather today, maybe don't just politely nod, look out the window at the sky, remember the sheer beautiful chaos of it all, and ask him what he thinks the weather actually is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Go step outside, feel the wind on your face, and appreciate the chaos.